I never really knew my mom. She passed away when I was just 3 years old in what everyone called a tragic accident. It's funny how those two words can carry so much weight, yet mean so little to a toddler. All I knew was that one day she was there, and the next, she wasn't. I have this one photo of her, you know? She's holding me, and her smile, it's like sunshine. Sometimes I'd stare at that photo for hours, trying to remember her voice, her laugh, anything. But it's all just a blur. Growing up without her was like having this constant nagging emptiness. You don't really notice it at first. But as you get older, you start to see the gaps. Mother's Day at school was always the worst. While other kids made cards and crafts, I'd sit there feeling like an outsider in my own classroom. My dad, well, he didn't handle her death well. It was like he wanted to erase every trace of her. He packed away all her things, cut ties with her family, and never ever talked about her. It was as if she had never existed. But for me, her absence was the loudest thing in our house. I used to make up stories about her in my head. I'd imagine her coming to my school plays, helping with homework, or just being there to hug me when I had a bad day. It sounds silly now, but it was how I coped. As I grew older, the shadow of her loss grew with me. It shaped everything. How I saw the world, how I interacted with others, even how I saw myself. I was the kid without a mom, and that label stuck to me like glue. But you know what's strange? Even though I barely knew her, even though I can't remember her voice or her touch, the love I feel for her is real. It's like this warm, sad ache that never really goes away. And in a way, that love, that missing piece, has been driving me forward all these years, shaping me into who I am today. After my mom passed, our house became, well, just a house. My dad, he was there physically, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. I remember trying so hard to connect with him when I was little. I'd draw pictures, bring home good grades, anything to see a smile or get a good job, kiddo. But most of the time, he'd just nod absent-mindedly and go back to whatever he was doing. It was like living with a ghost. Then came the parade of girlfriend. Oh boy, was that a circus. There was Sarah, the loud one who tried too hard to be my friend. Then Jessica, who barely acknowledged my existence. And let's not forget Amanda, who actually told my dad I was in the way of their relationship. Can you believe that? Each time a new woman walked through our door, I'd get this tiny spark of hope. Maybe this one would stick around. Maybe this one would make Dad happy and, by extension, make our house feel like a home again. But it never lasted. They'd come and go, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of perfume and another dent in my already fragile sense of stability. The worst part was that every failed relationship seemed to push my dad further away from me. It was like he saw me as a reminder of his past, of the family life he couldn't seem to recreate. I became the living, breathing embodiment of his failure, and I could feel it in every awkward silence and every avoided glance. Holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving dinners with just the two of us silently eating microwave meals. Christmas mornings where my presence felt more like obligations than gifts. And my birthdays, let's just say I learned pretty early on not to expect much. You know, people talk about the importance of a father figure, but what they don't tell you is how it feels when that figure is right there, yet completely out of reach. It's like being thirsty while standing in the rain. The thing you need is all around you, but you just can't seem to grasp it. As I got older, I stopped trying so hard. I learned to live in the silence, to find comfort in my own company. Our house became less of a home and more of a way station. A place where we both just happened to sleep and eat, waiting for the day when we could go our separate ways. Looking back, I realize now that my dad was probably doing the best he could. Grief does strange things to people. But man, growing up in that house, it was like trying to grow in the shade. Possible, but so much harder than it needed to be. In the midst of all that loneliness and the disconnected home, there was one person who made everything bearable. My grandpa. He was like this beacon of light in my otherwise pretty dark childhood. I remember the first time he came to visit after my mom passed. He walked in, took one look at me, and just scooped me up in this big bear hug. It was the first time since Mom died that I felt truly seen. You know? Grandpa's visits became the highlight of my life. He'd come over and suddenly our gloomy house would be filled with the smell of his pipe tobacco and the sound of his hearty laugh. He'd always bring me little gifts, nothing fancy, just small things like a cool rock he found or a book he thought I'd like. But man, those meant the world to me. We'd spend hours together, him teaching me things my dad never bothered to. He showed me how to fish, how to fix a bike, even how to make his famous pancakes. But more importantly, he listened. Really listened. When I talked about school or my friends or just my day, he'd lean in, ask questions, and make me feel like what I had to say mattered. The best times were when I got to stay at his house. It wasn't anything special, just a small place on the outskirts of town. But to me, it was paradise. We'd stay up late watching old movies, and in the morning, he'd make those incredible pancakes. For those few days, I felt like I had a real home. But you know what? My dad always seemed to have a problem with these visits. He'd regulate them strictly, never letting me stay more than a few days. I never understood why. It was like he was jealous or something, which made no sense considering how little attention he paid to me himself. Grandpa tried to bridge the gap between my dad and me. He'd talk to Dad, try to get him to open up, to be more involved, but it never seemed to work. Still, Grandpa never gave up on either of us. As I got older, I started to see how much Grandpa was sacrificing for me. He wasn't in the best financial shape, but he always made sure I had what I needed. He'd skip buying himself new clothes so he could get me school supplies. He even started a small savings account for my college, putting in whatever he could spare from his pension. Looking back now, I realize Grandpa was more than just a grandfather to me. He was the parent I needed, the friend I craved, and the role model I aspired to be. In a life where I often felt like a ship lost at sea, Grandpa was my lighthouse, always guiding me home. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse at home, enter Veronica, my dad's new girlfriend and eventually my stepmother. God, where do I even begin with her? Veronica was our neighbor's niece, staying with them temporarily. I remember the first time I saw her chatting with my dad over the fence. There was something in her eyes, a calculating look that made me uneasy. Little did I know how right my instincts were. From day one, Veronica had it out for me. At first, she tried to play nice, all sugary, sweet smiles and fake interest in my life. But that facade dropped pretty quickly. Soon, she was treating me like I was the maid or, worse, an unwelcome guest in my own home. "Oh, sweetie," she'd say in that sickly sweet voice of hers, "be a dear and do the dishes. And while you're at it, why don't you vacuum the living room? Oh, and don't forget to take out the trash." It was endless. We had a housekeeper, for crying out loud. But suddenly all the chores became my responsibility. But the worst part? My dad just went along with it. It was like he was under some kind of spell. He'd always been distant, but now he was actively unkind, backing up Veronica's every demand and criticism. Things really took a turn when they got married. Suddenly, I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was a threat. Veronica convinced my dad to stop giving me money for basic things like clothes or going out with friends. "He needs to learn the value of money," she'd say, as if depriving me of a social life was some kind of life lesson. I had to get a part-time job just to afford essentials. Meanwhile, Veronica was living it up, quitting her job to become a full-time homemaker. Yeah, right, more like a full-time thorn in my side. The mental games were the worst. She'd make snide comments about my appearance, my grades, my friends, anything she could use to chip away at my self-esteem. And always, she did it with this sickly sweet smile, as if she was just trying to help. I tried talking to my dad about it, but it was useless. He'd either dismiss my concerns or, worse, accuse me of being difficult. It was like living in some twisted fairy tale, but there was no fairy godmother coming to rescue me. The house that had once felt empty now felt suffocating. Every day was a battle. Every interaction a minefield. I found myself spending more and more time in my room, counting down the days until I could leave for college and escape this nightmare. Looking back, I realized Veronica was probably insecure, threatened by the reminder of my dad's past. But, man, the way she treated me, it was more than just insecurity. It was cruel, plain and simple. And the worst part was that it was the beginning of the storm that was about to hit my life. My 18th birthday, it should have been a day of celebration, a milestone, right? Instead, it turned out to be the day my world came crashing down around me. I woke up that morning with a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, my dad would remember. Maybe there'd be a card or even just a happy birthday, son. But when I came downstairs, all I got was my dad and Veronica sitting at the kitchen table wearing these grim expressions like they were at a funeral. "We need to talk," my dad said, and my stomach just dropped. I knew whatever was coming wasn't good. They sat me down, and that's when they dropped the bomb. "You need to move out," my dad said, his voice cold and detached. "Veronica's pregnant, and we need your room for the nursery." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. On my birthday of all days, they were kicking me out. I looked at Veronica, and I swear I saw a hint of a smirk on her face. "But where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Veronica chimed in then, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, sweetie, you're an adult now. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. Think of it as an opportunity to be homeless." I felt like I was in some kind of twisted nightmare. I tried to reason with them. I mentioned tenant laws, asked about paying rent, even suggested moving into the basement. But they had an answer for everything. My dad had already consulted a lawyer. Veronica needed a stress-free pregnancy environment. It was like they'd been planning this for weeks. The worst part was how casual they were about it all. Like they were discussing the weather, not tossing their son out onto the street. My dad even had the audacity to say, "Don't make a scene, it'll ruin the happy mood." Happy mood for whom? Certainly not for me. I retreated to my room in a daze, my birthday plans with friends forgotten. I started packing my things, tears streaming down my face. 18 years of memories of hoping for a family that cared, all coming down to this moment. As I was shoving clothes into a bag, reality hit me hard. I had nowhere to go. No plan, no future, just a bag of clothes and a broken heart. That night, instead of celebrating with friends, I found myself on my grandpa's doorstep, feeling lost and betrayed. My 18th birthday, the day I became an adult, and the day I lost what little semblance of family I had left. It's funny, you know? They say your 18th birthday is when you become an adult. For me, it was the day I realized I had been on my own all along. After the shock of being kicked out on my birthday, I thought things couldn't get any more surreal. Boy, was I wrong. The truth that came out next hit me like a ton of bricks. It all started when my dad began bombarding me with messages and calls, begging me to come back home. At first, I was confused. Why the sudden change of heart? Then I was angry. How dare he try to manipulate me after what he'd done? But my grandpa, he had this look on his face when I told him about Dad's messages. It was a mix of guilt and resolve. That's when he sat me down and dropped the real bombshell. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice heavy with years of kept secrets. And then he told me everything. Turns out my mom's family, the grandparents and uncle I'd never met, had been financially supporting me my entire life. Every penny for my education, my clothes, even the roof over my head came from them. My dad, he was just a middleman, passing on the money while pretending it was his. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted soap opera. My whole life had been built on a lie. The father who I thought was at least providing for me financially, even if he was emotionally absent, hadn't even been doing that. But wait, it gets better. The reason my dad was so desperate to get me back, he just found out that the money would stop now that I was 18 and out of the house. All those years of keeping me at arm's length, and now he wanted me back just for the cash. I was reeling. On one hand, I felt this immense gratitude towards my mom's family. They'd been silently supporting me all this time, asking for nothing in return. On the other hand, I felt betrayed by my dad for his deception, by my grandpa for keeping this secret, and Veronica, well, it all made sense now. She probably figured out where the money was coming from and decided to cut me out of the equation. Classic evil stepmother move, right? I spent days processing this information. It was like my entire childhood was being rewritten in my head. Every memory now had this new context, this hidden layer of truth. But you know what the craziest part was? In the midst of all this chaos and betrayal, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I knew the truth. No more secrets. No more lies. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. As I sat there trying to make sense of it all, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I was curious to see what the next chapter would bring. After all the revelations, I knew I had to meet my mom's family. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. My grandpa helped set it up, and before I knew it, the day arrived. We met at this cozy little restaurant. I was a bundle of nerves, pacing outside until my grandpa put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "They're just as nervous as you are," he said with a smile. When I walked in and saw them, it was like looking at pieces of myself I never knew existed. My grandmother had my mom's eyes. My eyes. My grandfather had the same crooked smile I see in the mirror every day. And my uncle, he was like an older version of me. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, overcome with emotion. Then my grandmother broke the silence. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking as she pulled me into a hug. Before I knew it, we were all embracing, tears flowing freely. As we sat down, they bombarded me with questions about my life, my interests, my dreams. But it wasn't intrusive. It was like they were trying to make up for lost time, piecing together the grandson they never knew. My uncle cracked jokes that had me in stitches, reminding me so much of the sense of humor I developed over the years. My grandfather shared stories about my mom when she was my age, and for the first time, I felt like I truly knew her. But it was my grandmother who really got to me. She held my hand across the table and said, "We've loved you from afar for so long. We're so sorry we couldn't be there in person." I wanted to be angry at them for staying away, but I couldn't. The love in their eyes, the genuine regret in their voices, it was overwhelming. They explained how seeing me was too painful at first, reminding them too much of my mom. But they never stopped caring, never stopped providing for me from behind the scenes. As the evening went on, we talked about the future. They assured me that my college was taken care of and that they wanted to be part of my life moving forward. "We've missed so much," my uncle said. "We don't want to miss anymore." When it was time to leave, I didn't want the night to end. We made plans to meet again, promises to stay in touch. As I hugged each of them goodbye, I felt something I'd been missing my whole life, a sense of belonging. Walking out of that restaurant, I felt like a different person. The anger and hurt from my dad's betrayal was still there, but it was overshadowed by this new feeling of hope and connection. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. I had a family, a real family, people who loved me, who wanted to be part of my life. As I look back at them waving goodbye, I realized something profound. Sometimes the family you find is more powerful than the family you're born into. That night, as I lay in bed replaying every moment of the evening, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I was excited about what the future held. I had found my true family, and with them by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next.